Alright, hey everybody. So today I'm going to be releasing my fully procedural, fully customizable skin shader. I've made 6 different presets, but they all use the same 2 node groups. So if you want to pick those up, you can check out my Gumroad. For the first week it'll be completely free. And it'll include a blend file with all the 6 shader presets, as well as a demo scene, which is the first image that you saw. It'll also include a 2K, 4K, and 8K diffuse image textures of each of those presets. And yeah. And again, for the first week, it'll be completely free. Right, so what you see here is I have these are all the 6 different shaders just with the spheres. And yeah. So some of the different things that you can control are things like the amount of redness, blueness, and yellowness on the face. You can control the strength of that. You can control the height of it. You can control the amount of blush. You can change the amount of blood, blue blood, and veins. You can change the color of the skin, saturation of the skin, and lightness of the skin. You can also change the amount of noise that's in the subsurface. You can change the roughness and the contrast of the roughness. And in the bump node, you can also change the stretching of the fat around the normals, the noise size of the fat, the amount of fat, the bump strength of the fat. You can change pore stretching, pore amount, pore size, pore contrast, pore bump strength, and also wrinkle stretching, wrinkle noise size, wrinkle noise strength, wrinkle size / amount, and wrinkle bump strength. And with that, you can create a whole variety of different textures, including almost any different skin color, skin texture, and basically any type of skin that you'd ever need. And if you want to delve into the node groups, then you have even more control, even more precise control over the results. Again, you can use this for things like stylized things. You can use it for realistic things. One thing that I recommend is that you bake it out, because it's really dependent on ambient occlusion and pointiness, which only really work in cycles. So baking that first would be really helpful, because those again take a really long time to calculate, and you'll just save yourself a lot of computing. Also, a couple quick disclaimers. This is a really heavy shader, so I'd really highly recommend optimizing your render settings. So turning off things like caustics, especially, and then turning on approximated GI, because that can really help your performance. And then yeah. So some of the things that I've changed for the presets are, I've just gone into the nodes, changed the hue of the skin and the lightness of the skin, which are the 2 of the presets or 2 of the sliders that you see. And then in addition, you can change the strength of the blue blood and the veins and all of that. And I've also gone into the nodes a little bit and changed things like some of the contrast. So yeah. And yeah, those are the nodes. Have fun with them. Alright, so I'm just gonna open up a new file, get rid of that ungodly thing, and yeah, I'm gonna just take this model that I made, and then I'm gonna move this around a little bit. And the first thing that we're gonna do is I'm gonna change all my render settings. So I'm gonna get rid of some material first. Alright, so the first thing I always do is I always turn down the background light strength to 0, so that's completely black, because we don't want any outside sources of light other than what's completely in our control. So first thing I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion, turn up trace precision, and then let's go down to screen space reflections, turn off half-res trace, half-res trace, sharp trace precision, max roughness, and edge fading, all of their max settings. Performance, turn up high quality normals, shadows, high bit depth, and yeah, that's it for our EV settings. And now we'll go to cycles. Again, I'm just using EV for while I'm working, but I'm gonna be using cycles for anything final. So here I'm going to go into light paths, turn down transmission, transparency, and glossy by 2. Or turn down glossy by 2 and then turn down all the rest of them to 0. Turn off reflective and refractive caustics. Turn up fast GI approximations. Go down to performance. Turn these to 256 pixels. And yeah, those are my cycle settings. I'm just gonna go into my EV setting thing, and then we'll start making the shader. So I'm just going to shader editor, give this a new material, and yeah, let's get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a geometry node, then a color ramp, plug pointiness into the factor of the color ramp, put that into a viewer node, and if we move these around we can see, actually let's go into cycles for this, because this is dependent on us being in cycles, because for some reason it doesn't work anywhere else, or in EV, so yeah. So now I'm going to give this a basic skin color. Actually, you know what? I'm going to cheat a little bit and grab the color from this one, because I don't feel like finding that color again. So I'm going to go here. Then let's get out of there and put that in, and wow, we have a skin color. So yeah, do that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go turn that up, give our inside thing a red color, and that'll kind of simulate blood. Yeah, blood. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab a ambient occlusion node, then copy this color ramp, and now we're going to do our blush. So what I want to do here though is first turn down the saturation so it's completely white, because when we multiply these two together we don't want any weird things to happen, and white in a multiply color just means that there's no change. So yeah. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this white part over. I'm going to go into Eevee for this. So I'm going to bring that red part over, and then the white part over. Until it looks good. Or it's not going to look good right now, but until we get the desired effect. So what this simulates is kind of blood on the outside of the skin. Kind of like blush a little bit. And now I'm going to move those over a little bit. Get a mix RGB. Multiply. We're going to put those in there. And then we're going to set this to multiply. And we can set this factor to however much we need. And I'm going to demonstrate this in cycles because, again, edge data. And when I refer to edge data, that just means the pointiness factor from the geometry node. So this will change how much strength we give the blush. And you know what, I'm gonna bring these closer together so I can give them a bit more contrast. So now that we have that, what I'm gonna do is let's see. So when you're painting faces, there are generally 3 sections of color on the face. So if I go around here, you have a section of blue, then a section of red, and then a section of yellow on top. So we're now going to try to simulate that. So we're going to grab a gradient texture. Where is that? Okay, so yeah, gradient texture. Then press Ctrl T to grab our texture coordinates. And then grab a color. So what I'm going to set these to is, again, our blue, our red, and our yellow. It's more going to be of an orange yellow so that the colors mix better. But yeah, so I'm going to then set that to constant, because then we won't get any of that magenta from the red and blue. And then just kind of move these around a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is take a noise texture, put that into my texture coordinates, and we're going to use our object coordinates for this. Then we're going to take a color mix RGB and set this to multiply. Then what we do is we multiply those two together, and we have our kind of gradient between them. So then we can set this to however much noise we want in that. And then let's see, I'm gonna rotate this by 90 degrees. And then set this to 0.4 so that they're in the right sections. And then I'm going to set my Z scale to 0.6, and that'll get a longer transition. Where's it? 0.9. Let's try 0.8. So, and then I'm gonna I'm going to turn up the scale to 29, detail to max, roughness, and then distortion to 1. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up to the middle of our face, and voila, we have it generally in the right sections. And yeah, so we have that effect that we're looking for. But the thing is, we don't want this to happen all over the body, and we just want this happening in the face, so we need a way to restrict that to just the face. So again, we're going to take a gradient texture, and then Control T, rotation on the y-axis by 90, object coordinates, and I'm going to turn the scale down on the Z to around 0.5, and then we're going to move our location until, let's say, just around the bottom of the neck. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a converter math node and set this to add, and this will change like how strong it is. Yeah, so then we're gonna put a invert color node into that, so it changes from there. And then what we can do is we're going to take a color mix RGB and then have this node as our mix factor. Then we can take this node that we made here, plug that into the top one, and then this one we can put into the bottom for now, and then that'll give us this effect. So basically what this is doing is it's telling where each of those will be allowed to exist. So this can only exist on the top of the head. I'm not really good at explaining that, but yeah. So now we're going to do a little bit more work on this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get a texture, a noise texture, Control T, object coordinates, color ramp, plug that into the factor, and voila. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to try to use this noise texture to simulate blood. And so first thing, we're going to turn up the scale just a tad, detail all the way up, roughness to around, say, 0.8, and distortion to 0.5, and we're going to turn up just by moving these sliders closer to each other, we're essentially increasing the contrast, but in a much more controlled way. So whenever I say increasing contrast, this is usually what I mean. So now we're going to make this red, and voila, and we can change how much we want. So I'm gonna do that, then I'm gonna duplicate this, then I'm going to make this blue because we have a little bit of like blue blood, if you will, or what looks like blue blood, and I'm gonna make this slightly, not completely blue. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move the location a little bit. And then next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make veins. So we're gonna use that same noise texture, but we're gonna turn down the roughness until we get something like that. And then move these closer together so we get kind of more wispy stuff. And we're gonna change the scale on our noise texture a little bit. And I'm gonna turn the distortion up a little bit. And yeah, so this is our kind of like vein thing, but it also kind of, it can also kind of look like bruises, which is really good for our old person texture, or wrinkled person texture. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take this multiply node and then put that right there. So we have this texture that we made, and then we're going to plug this in here. And by using multiply, we can change how strong the blood is. So right now we're just going to leave that at 0.5. We're going to duplicate that again, plug the one that we just made into the top one, plug in our blue blood into the next one. I'm going to Eevee for this. So yeah, and then we're going to plug that into that one, then duplicate this and do the same thing for our vein things. And voila. So now basically we've combined all of the textures that we made so far so that they all show up. And I'm gonna change this a little bit, turn up the roughness. And this is essentially our diffuse texture. And again, by changing the factor on all of these, we can change the strength of the blush, the strength of our red blood, the strength of blue blood, which I'm gonna, yeah, and then the strength of our vein things. So now that we've done that, there's still one more thing that we need to do, is we need to connect it to our red, or our yellow, red, and blue texture. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use this mix thing that we made and then just switch that with our now mostly finished skin texture. So now the effect of the blue and the red and all that is a bit too strong, so what we can do is just change the strength of that through our add node, and by going up in value we can change how strong it is. So I'm going to stay around 0.89 is the one I believe I used. Actually, let's go to 0.8. That's better. And then I'm also going to turn down the strength of our blush a little bit. turn up red blood, turn up blue blood, tad, and this is essentially our diffuse texture. But now, what we still need to do is our roughness and subsurface. Because if we just take a look at it right now, it doesn't look very good. Because it's just, yeah, it doesn't look very good. So, and the reason why that is because of just how inconsistent the real world is when it comes to roughness and stuff. Is most things to ever exist don't have a consistent roughness. So what we're going to do to simulate that is we're going to take that diffuse texture and put it through a color ramp. Grab that there. And this is a really heavy shader, so make sure that you're saving a lot. So now that we have our diffuse texture, we run that through a color ramp, and voila. So we're just going to use this to drive our roughness. And when you're doing roughness, you always want, or almost always want, a really high contrast. So I'm going to bring these together until I have the effect I want. So now that we have our desired level of contrast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick our almost final roughness values. So I'm going to bring our top value to, say, 0.8, and then our lowest value to 0.5. Because if we kept it at 0, then it basically turned the skin into a mirror, which doesn't really happen a lot. So yeah. And then let's see, I'm going to take that and then grab a color, brightness, contrast, and then what this lets us do is use this as an input in our final node, and that kind of just lets us change as a whole what our roughness is and how much contrast we give it. We're not going to mess with that right now, so yeah. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a color hue saturation and plug that into our mix thing. And yeah, so then we can use this again as an input for our final node. Now, yeah, so this is what our roughness is going to be. And grab those, plug this into our base color, and now we're just missing one thing, which is our subsurface. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to grab yet again another ambient occlusion node, now I'm going to grab a color ramp, and who would have guessed, another color ramp, and we're just gonna use our diffuse texture as one of our parameters for subsurface. and then also our ambient occlusion as another parameter for subsurface. Except this time I'm going to turn on the ambient occlusion node, I'm going to turn on inside, and then I'm going to get a color, mix RGB, set that to multiply, so Blender doesn't crash. I'm going to save, because it's probably going to crash while I'm recording. So let's call this skin test v2. So let's see, multiply these together, and yeah. So in the node that you guys saw, our factor is, oh boy. So yeah, basically our factor is controlling how much of our diffuse texture shows up. So let's put this at 0.9, and again we can see our diffuse texture showing up. And our computer's being slow, so this might take a while. This is controlling how much of our diffuse shows up, and I'm gonna let's go into cycles for a second. So if you can see here, what this is basically doing is all the white areas is where subsurface is allowed to happen, and all the black areas are where there's no subsurface. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch these, because basically we want the most subsurface to happen on the really protruding parts of our model. So that would be like the ears, the nose, and the eyelids, and this does a really good job of that. And then I'm just gonna bring that in so there's a bit more contrast. And again, here, I'm bringing those in so there's a bit more contrast again. And voila, we have our subsurface parameter. And what I'm going to do with these is, let's see, I'm going to grab these, put them over here for a second, and then grab yet another color ramp, and yeah. So basically what this will let us do is control our subsurface as a whole, so we don't have to mess with each individual part like the ambient occlusion and our diffuse. And generally these values are almost always going to stay the same. So I'm going to put our lowest value at 0 and highest value at 0.2. And those will generally average out at around like 0.1 or so. Again, with the most happening around the ears and the parts that protrude a lot. Yeah, so you can see that effect here. Then I'm going to save a lot, and this is generally our node tree for our diffuse. So now let's move on to our bump, which is going to be our fat, our pores, and our wrinkles. So I'm really excited to show you guys this part because it's probably already been thought of, but I think it's a really cool technique. So yeah, I'm gonna scale those in a little bit. Grab those and just move them out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a Voronoi texture. And if you see me pausing, I'm just looking at my original nodes just to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So I'm going to grab that, Control T, Object, and this is going to be our fat. So who would have guessed we're going to use another color ramp, and yeah, so I'm going to move these, and voila, it looks like fat. But here's the really cool part, is we can change how much noise the fat has, like around the edges, and how much it stretches around the model. And I'm just gonna turn that up a little bit. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab that, get a noise texture, then a mix RGB, or sorry, wrong step. Mix RGB, grab our object coordinates, put that into color 2, and now through this we can change how strong the noise is, and then how much the size of the noise. So like right here, and I'm going to turn up the detail, roughness, but I don't want to go too high with the roughness because then they'll start to look like pores, and we want to keep those entirely separate. And I'm also going to turn up the distortion just a tad, and I'll put this at around 0.92, let's say. And voila, we have our fat. So I'm just gonna unplug these right now so we can save a bit of performance. And grab our vector bump, put that in there, normal, and yeah. Alright, so now that we have, actually, almost forgot. So we're going to do another really cool technique which I found. Alright, I hope I discovered it, but someone else probably did it. So I'm going to take a mix node, plug that into the object coordinates, and then grab our normals and plug those in. And what that'll let us do is change how much it stretches based on the normals. So if you can see here, if it's just at 1, then it'll have no effect. It won't be affected by where it's protruding and stuff. So I'm going to, and then if we set that to 0, it's completely affected by the normals. So I'm going to set that to around 0.9. So that basically it stretches just a little bit around places like the nose and around the eyes. And then I'm going to so yeah, it's really cool. And I'm going to turn down the scale on my noise a little bit. Because again, we don't want so we don't want any pores for this part, because we're going to do that in a different node group. And yeah, so let's get started on those. So I'm going to grab this Voronoi texture and Control T again, Object, so I'm going to turn up to, let me see, 50. I'm going to grab a invert, brightness contrast, and let me see. Yeah, so I'm going to then grab noise texture. Actually, no, not noise texture. Just a mix RGB for this one. Again, do our object and normals. And I'm going to turn up the scale for this one, because these are going to be our pores. And by changing the brightness, we can change how large or close together our pores are. And then contrast, we can change how kind of gentle they are. So I'm going to do pretty harsh for this one. So let's go around maybe 5. And then turn down my brightness. And then turn up my scale a lot. Not too much though. Let's go 250. Oh my god. And then turn down the stretching. So in the original node, this is how we control our stretching for each of the maps, or for each of the bumps. And yeah, let's stick with that for now. And now we're going to do the wrinkles. So again, I'm going to grab a Voronoi texture, Shift D, and nope, I'm just going to copy this whole thing. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to bring this in a lot. And turn up scale. And then what we're going to do for this is we're going to go into our F1 slot and then change that to distance to edge. And that'll give us this kind of scaly effect. And then we bring the contrast to very high. And then this is what our wrinkles are. And again, we can change how noisy it is, and then also size of the noise, stuff like that. And again, how much that stretches. So I feel like this is a good place. And yeah, so this is how we get our wrinkle texture. So now what I'm going to do is going to grab a vector bump, another bump, and another bump. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to plug our fat into the height, and let me see. This is the effect we get, and then I'm going to plug the brightness, our pores, which is the second one that we made, into height, and then that bump node into the normals of the first one, and then let me see just a second. So if we take a look at this node for our pores right here, we can see that if we just left this as is, our pores would be sticking out rather than protruding in. So we're going to tick invert, and that'll have those pores facing in. And then again, for our wrinkles, we're going to put that into height, and then invert so that our wrinkles are facing inwards. And then plug that into the normals of our pores. And now we have a fully created normal bump map thing. And let me see. Yeah. So I don't usually like to have the fat super strong because I want that to be super subtle. So I'm gonna put that at around, say, 0.1. Let's see how that looks. I'm gonna and yeah, you get a very beautiful effect. So I'm going to camera view real quick, and then let's go to cycles. Hopefully it doesn't crash. So if you can see how slowly my mouse is moving, it's incredible. So let's see if I can zoom in a little bit without it crashing. And let's try putting this at 1 just for demonstration. So yeah, so as you can see, that just kind of breaks it, and that's why we don't want to have the fat too strong. So let's try 0.3. Again, too strong, so stick with 0.1. And yeah, that's our normal map. Or bump map, sorry. And it shows up better on Eevee, just because it doesn't render as well. So if you're just looking to see how it actually looks, then definitely do it in cycles, because that's probably what your final render is going to be in. So you want to kind of practice how you're going to perform. So yeah, in general, bump and normals act really different in Eevee than they do in cycles, so that's generally why I prefer cycles, because it's just easier to get a good result. And yeah, so now what we're going to do is we're going to turn these into our group nodes. And yeah, so the what we're going to be using as our inputs are, again, our fat stretching, fat size, fat strength, fat amount, fat bump, pore stretching, or for our bump node, pore amount, pore size, pore contrast, pore bump, pore strength, pore wrinkle stretching, wrinkle noise size, and yeah, let me show you guys. So let's grab all of these and then press Control G, and voila, we have a group node. So what I'm going to do is for our fat stretching, if you can remember, it's where we used where we mix our object and normal coordinates. So I'm going to grab one input, then when we want to change our fat noise size, we're going to be changing scale, so just plug those in. Then when you want to change fat noise strength, that's our second mix. And then what we want to do is for fat amount, we use our scale. And then for our fat bump strength, we're going to take this all the way over here and plug it into strength. And then for our pores, we're going to do our pore stretching and see pore size, and then pore contrast, and then for the strength, we're going to just put that right there again. And we're going to do the same thing that we did for our first one for our wrinkles. So we're going to do that there for the stretching, noise size, noise factor, wrinkle amount, and then let me see. And then strength. And this is our bump node. And I'm gonna just kind of move this. And then if we go tab N to bring up our context menu, we can go to factor, and then let's do fat stretch, fat noise size, fat noise strength, fat amount, and the like. So I'm just gonna name all of these real quick. And voila, we have our finished bump node. So again, if you want to take a look at these, yeah. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing for our diffuse, roughness, and subsurface. So I'm going to press Control G, and now that they're all in a node, they're in what node group? Let's get moving on. Alright, so for this one, the controllers that I want is our blue, red, and yellow height thing. So what I'm going to do here is so what I'm going to do here is put one for location and another for scale. So we can change how tall we want our factor to be for the thing. And let's see. And what we're going to do is right here, we're going to put one into our top value, and that'll be able to change our strength, the strength of the blue, red, yellow effect. And then let's see. Next we're going to do our blush strength. So I'm going to put this one into the factor of our multiply, and then another one into the factor of our second multiply for our red blood, and then another one into our third multiply for our blue blood, and another input to our veins. And for our vein, I'm gonna want to do an input into the scale, so we can change how much vein we want and how big of a vein we want. And then let's see. Next up is our skin hue. So I'm going to grab an input and put it into our hue saturation node right here. So one into hue, one into saturation, and another one into value. So what we're controlling here is our skin color, skin saturation, and the skin brightness, or how much black is mixed in, or how bright or dark the skin is. And then yeah, that's it for our diffuse. So next we're going to go into our subsurf. So I'm going to put an input into our thing, and this is what's going to control our subsurf noise, if you will, which is basically how much of our diffuse we're multiplying with the ambient occlusion node. And then we're going to use that to let me see. Yeah. And then so next up is going to be roughness, which we're going to control here. So this input into the brightness is going to control our general roughness, and then here is going to control how much contrast there is between the roughness. And those are all of our inputs. So now we're going to do our outputs, which are going to be diffuse, then subsurface, and then roughness. And then if you want, you can go ahead and label all of those. And yeah. And then we have our finished diffuse roughness subsurf node, which in the blend file that I've included on my Gumroad, I've just called that the basic texture, and then I've called this one the bump texture. And in general, they're all going to be named by what preset it is, so it's going to be named either, in general, skin color, young skin color, wrinkled, and then basic or bump for each of them. And yeah, that's how you make your node groups. And one more thing is, while that is pretty much it, I'm gonna set the subsurface color to a slightly pink color because I just feel like that helps the realism a little bit. And yeah, that's how you make the nodes. Let's hope Blender doesn't crash. Yep. And again, like I mentioned earlier before I end so before I end the video, I want to remind you guys that you should pretty much always bake out your diffuse texture at least, because this shader is missing, well, it's missing a couple things, but basically, one, ambient occlusion takes a really long time to calculate, so that'll save you a lot of time in the viewport, and it means that you might not crash as much. And then second of all, you want to be able to paint in things like lips and around the eyes, because sometimes it'll either be dark, or if you want to add like eyeliner or something, then you want to paint those in. So yeah, make sure to bake those. And when you do bake those, you want to make sure to turn off all of your lights in both render and viewport, and then turn your world lighting to a flat white, and that'll calculate, or that'll make sure that your lighting is completely flat to get all of the ambient occlusion correct. Because in this case, the way that we're using ambient occlusion isn't for lighting, but rather for non-lighting effects. So we don't want any lighting interfering other than the flat world light. And yeah, that's how you make the skin shader. And if you want to check out my Gumroad, it's going to be free for the first week. And then, yeah, thanks guys for watching.